I was 7 months pregnant the day my body gave me a warning I could not ignore. That morning started like every other one in our little Amish settlement. The sun had barely stretched over the fields when I was already on my feet, kneading dough with one hand and holding my lower back with the other. The baby had been sitting heavy for days, and my ankles were so swollen I could barely fit into my shoes. I kept telling myself this was normal. Women around me had always said the same thing. Pain is part of the blessing. Weakness is a test. Endure quietly, and the Lord will see you through. But that morning was different. My hands were trembling. My head felt hot and light at the same time. Every sound in the kitchen seemed too loud, and every smell turned my stomach. I remember looking down at the bread dough and suddenly feeling like the floor was moving under me. I grabbed the edge of the table before I could fall. My husband Eli was buttoning his suspenders near the door, getting ready to leave for the barn. I said, "Eli, I don't feel right." He didn't even turn around at first. "You said that yesterday." "No," I told him, trying to steady my voice. "I mean it. I feel sick. My chest hurts. My head is pounding." He looked at me then, but not with concern, more like annoyance, like I was another chore added to his morning. "You're pregnant," he said. "Women get sick. That does not mean I stop my work." I stared at him because for a second I truly thought he was joking. I thought maybe he'd smile and come over and touch my forehead and tell me to sit down, but he just reached for his hat. I said, "Can you stay a little while? Just until I feel better?" And that was when he gave me the sentence I still hear in my sleep. "That is not my work. Not my work." As if I was a spilled bucket or a crooked fence. As if carrying his child and nearly fainting in front of him was some problem outside his responsibility. I stood there in that warm kitchen, feeling colder than I had ever felt in my life. The truth is, I had already been disappointed long before that day. I just had not let myself say it out loud. When we first married, I thought I was stepping into love. On our wedding night, he was gentle, smiling, almost shy. We laughed together. He held my hand like I was something precious. I remember thinking, this is what safety feels like. This is what being chosen feels like. For those first weeks, he looked at me as if I was the only woman in the room. And then I got pregnant. At first, I was so happy I nearly cried every time I thought about it. I expected the baby would bring us closer. I expected he would become softer, more protective, more present. I expected marriage to deepen. Instead, it was like a door quietly shut between us. He stopped asking how I felt. He stopped walking beside me and started walking ahead of me. If I got tired, he called it laziness. If I cried, he called it nerves. If I asked for help lifting water or carrying laundry, he would say, "Women have done this before you. You are not the first." I kept lowering my expectations, hoping if I asked for less, maybe I would hurt less. But somehow he still never met them. By the time I reached 7 months, I was doing nearly everything alone. Cooking, scrubbing, washing, sewing, sweeping, smiling through church, pretending I was fine. I remember lying awake at night with my baby turning inside me and thinking, why did I get married if I am lonelier now than I was before? That morning, after Eli left, I tried to keep working. I told myself I was being dramatic, that maybe if I sat for a moment, drank some water, and rested, the dizziness would pass. It didn't. Within an hour, I was burning with fever. My skin felt too tight. My stomach cramped so hard I had to bend over the sink and breathe through my teeth. Then came the pain low in my back, sharp and deep, and fear finally broke through all the denial. Something was wrong. I went next door to ask for help from my sister-in-law, Miriam. She opened the door just enough to look at me. I must have looked terrible because she frowned right away. "What happened to you?" "I need Eli," I whispered. "Or I need someone to take me to a doctor. I'm sick. I think something is wrong with the baby." At that, her face changed, not softer, harder. She glanced over her shoulder like she didn't want anyone hearing us. Then she said, "You should not speak like that. Fear invites trouble. Miriam, please." She stepped outside and pulled the door nearly closed behind her. "People are already talking," she said quietly. "Talking about what?" "About how often you complain, about how you are struggling with pregnancy more than other women, about how maybe you were not prepared for marriage." I felt my throat tighten. "I am not complaining. I am sick." She folded her arms. "Pregnancy is not an illness." I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her if she thought fever was holy, if pain was a virtue, if women were supposed to disappear quietly just to make everyone else comfortable. But all I said was, "Please help me." She looked at me with something that almost resembled pity, but it wasn't enough. "Eli is working. I will send one of the boys when he returns." When he returns. Like hours didn't matter. Like my baby and I could wait politely for a man who had already told me I was not his work. By noon I was back in my kitchen, sitting on the floor because I no longer trusted my legs. My dress clung to my skin with sweat. My vision kept blurring in and out. I remember pressing both hands to my stomach and whispering, "Please stay. Please stay with me." I was talking to my baby, but maybe I was talking to myself too. Sometime later, 2 women from our district arrived. Not to help, to advise. They sat at my table while I could barely lift my head, and one of them told me the Lord sometimes sends suffering to shape a wife's spirit. The other said young women often expect too much tenderness from marriage and too little discipline. Then they suggested I had probably worn myself out by dwelling too much on my own discomfort. I was too weak to argue, but inside I was breaking apart. There is a special kind of loneliness in being sick around people who have already decided your pain is a moral failure. By the time Eli finally came home, evening shadows were stretching across the floorboards. I was shivering so hard my teeth were chattering. He looked at me, then at the untouched supper, and sighed. "You stayed on the floor all day." I laughed then, but it came out ugly and cracked. I tried not to. He crouched in front of me, but not out of tenderness, out of irritation. "You have embarrassed me. Miriam says you frighten people. I needed help. You needed composure." I looked at him, really looked at him, and something inside me went silent. I had spent months hoping for warmth from a man who treated me like weather damage. In that moment I realized I could die waiting for him to become the husband I imagined on our wedding night. Then I felt a wetness between my legs. My heart stopped. I looked down and saw blood. Not a lot, but enough. Enough to make the room tilt. Enough to wipe that hard expression right off Eli's face. He stood so fast the chair behind him scraped the floor. "Get up." I almost laughed again. All day I had begged for help, and now suddenly there was urgency because the evidence could no longer be explained away. He took me outside, hitched the buggy in silence, and drove faster than I had ever seen him drive. The whole ride I held my stomach and prayed. Not pretty prayers, desperate ones. The kind that come from somewhere lower than language. At the small clinic outside our settlement, the nurse took one look at me and rushed me in. "Infection," they said. "High fever. Dangerous dehydration. Too much stress on the body." If I had come much later, things could have gone very badly. I lay there under clean white light, listening to strangers speak kindly to me, and I cried so hard I could barely breathe. Not because I was in pain, not because I was afraid, because a stranger had touched my shoulder more gently in 1 minute than my husband had in months. The baby was still alive. That was the sentence that saved me. I must have repeated it 100 times in my head. Still alive, still alive, still alive. I stayed overnight at the clinic. Eli came in once, stood near the doorway, and asked how long it would take before I could return home. Not how I felt, not if I was scared, not if I needed anything. Just when I would be useful again. I looked at him and said, "I am not coming back." He blinked like he had misheard me. "What?" "I am not coming back," I said again, stronger this time. "If I go back there, I will disappear." For the first time in our marriage, he had no answer. Maybe he thought I would calm down. Maybe he thought I was speaking from fever. Maybe he had never imagined I had a line at all. But I did. And I had reached it on the kitchen floor, alone carrying a child, while the people who should have loved me discussed my attitude. An older woman from the clinic helped me contact a distant cousin who had left the community years before. She came for me 2 days later. I will never forget the way she walked into that room wearing plain clothes from a world I had been taught to fear, and yet she was the safest thing I had seen in months. When she hugged me, I nearly fell apart again. I left with one small bag, a swollen body, a frightened heart, and a baby still kicking inside me like a reason to keep going. People in my old community said I was selfish. They said I was rebellious. They said suffering is part of a woman's duty, and that I had failed my marriage. Maybe I finally understood that love without care is not love at all. Maybe marriage is not proved by how much loneliness a woman can survive inside it. Maybe God never asked me to set myself on fire just to keep a cold man warm. A month later, I gave birth to a little girl with lungs strong enough to shake the whole room. When they placed her on my chest, I looked at her tiny face and made her a promise I had never been able to make to myself before. I said, "You will never have to earn tenderness by suffering." Sometimes I still think about that morning in the kitchen, about the dough under my hands, the sunlight on the table, the moment I said I didn't feel right and the man I married answered, "That is not my work." He was right about one thing. My survival was not his work. It became mine, and I did it. I chose to live. I chose my child. I chose to believe that being a wife did not mean being abandoned with a smile on my face. I chose to walk away from every voice that told me pain was a woman's portion and silence was her proof of goodness. So if you ever find yourself surrounded by people who call your suffering normal, who treat your breaking point like an inconvenience, who expect your loyalty but offer no compassion, hear me clearly. Leaving is not weakness. Asking for help is not sin. And the day they turn their backs on you may be the day you finally learn how to save yourself.